Welcome to the Cyclepedia Podcast, Episode 1, Coolant and Corrosion. I'm the Senior Technician here at Cyclepedia, and with me today I have Will Graham, our Managing Editor.
Well, Greg, today on the podcast we're going to go over cooling system issues. We're going to talk with Dave Kimmey from Engine Ice High Performance Engine Coolant. We're going to go over some member tech questions that we've had on cooling systems, and we're also going to see a video that Greg put together on water pump seals and coolant corrosion. And we're also going to talk about what's new here at Cyclepedia.
So as Will mentioned earlier, we were going to speak with Dave Kimmey from Engine Ice High Performance Coolant. We've got Dave here on the line ready to go to ask him a few questions about this fantastic product he has. So David, we've put together some questions to go over with you on our Cyclepedia podcast. What is Engine Ice High Performance Coolant, and what makes it different from regular coolant?
Well, Engine Ice High Performance Coolant is a propylene glycol-based coolant that is specifically designed to improve not only your cooling, but to maintain a more efficient cooling system. And what we really try to get people to understand is it's not always about lower temperatures, but it's about stability. Theoretically, if I can allow your engine to maintain a more consistent operating temperature for a longer period of time, you're going to maintain a more consistent horsepower for a longer period of time. And that's what we try to get people to understand. Sometimes they get lower operating temperatures, and that'll vary from bike to bike and location to location and rider to rider. But what we try to get to emphasize most and get people to understand is consistency is what we're looking for.
Oh, well, thank you. No, that makes sense. Okay, so next, now we're up here. Today's a great example. It's really cold. It's snowing. So is this going to work as an antifreeze?
Yes, Engine Ice is an antifreeze, and it will go down to 27 below zero. If you do get, now let's clarify something here in regards to the world of antifreeze in general, and not just Engine Ice, to answer a couple of questions that people wonder. What happens if it gets colder than that? First thing is you should move. But if you can't move, then the next thing we would suggest is you understand that if you have an antifreeze that goes down to 26 below zero, not that we would recommend you ever operate the engine at those temperatures, but what's going to happen is only the water component is going to freeze. The antifreeze component is not going to freeze. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the antifreeze of your choice, let's say it's a product that's not Engine Ice, is mixed at a 50-50 ratio. Only 50% of that product is actually going to freeze. The other 50% is not going to freeze. What you're basically going to have in your engine is margarita.
So a slush, yeah, I got you.
Correct.
Okay. Nice. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I bet a lot of people are not aware of that.
Right. Well, now another thing you can do as well is also loosen the radiator cap. Just leave it loose, sitting on top of the radiator, and that allows for expansion. So that way, just in case it gets down so low that the freezing creates an expansion, the cap being loose will allow it to expand out that cap.
I got you. And then we do that while we're packing our things and getting ready to move from the cold climate. Okay. All right, so we're good there. All right, now with all those elements in place, is this gonna help us with corrosion protection? As far as our cooling system goes, is this going to be have protection for corrosion?
Absolutely. Engine Ice meets or exceeds all ASTM and SAE standards and requirements for corrosion protection, as well as other protections, including the foaming, because they want to make sure you only have a limited amount of foam and how quickly the foam breaks down inside of the engine. So we meet or exceed all ASTM and SAE standards and requirements.
Okay. And on that note, we had a relatively new Honda CBR 250 in our shop recently, and on teardown, there was a lot of corrosion and pitting on the impeller shaft. And you think that could have been something with the coolant that bike was supplied with?
It could be any number of things. It could be the antifreeze that was in it. It could also likely be that the owner of the motorcycle, and I'm going to guess this is probably the most likely scenario, is the owner of the motorcycle probably experienced when at stoplights, spitting out incident several times where it would just cough up a little bit of antifreeze here and there. So rather than putting in more antifreeze, it was just adding water. So you probably had more water than antifreeze, which means you had less corrosion protection.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. So when we're going to go and change over to this engine ice, will it mix with other products? What should we do there?
We recommend you never mix any antifreeze products, even if they're of the same type. There are three basic types of antifreeze. You have ethylene glycol, propylene glycol, and then what is basically your Dex-Cool type of products, or the long-lasting. Those are called OAT antifreeze products. We don't recommend you ever mix any types of products, even if it's two different types of ethylene glycol or two different brands of propylene glycol, because everybody does something a little different. It's the same concept as you never want to mix oil. So first thing is you shouldn't mix types. Second thing is if you mix, or you should never mix brands, but you should never mix types, because if you mix ethylene glycol and propylene glycol or an OAT with one of those, it can actually gel. So you should always, if you're using a different product, you do not know exactly what's in the engine, you should always drain the system at minimum, rinse it out, and start over.
Okay. How often should we change this? We're real. We like to stick to the periodic maintenance charts. Usually they're for the factory, maybe every 2 years. What do you recommend with your cooling system, your coolant?
What we recommend is, and we recommend this for any antifreeze product, because what our goal is performance. We're looking at everything from a performance standpoint. How can I get the most out of the cooling system that I have, whether it's a car, a motorcycle, or anything, because we're looking at optimum performance. So our answer to that question is once a year. Okay. We recommend you should change once a year. If you're a racer and you're riding hard and you're doing a lot of long enduros and you're putting a great deal of stress on the engine or anything like that, twice a year. Just like any other fluid in your system, whether it's a shock oil, a fork oil, an engine oil, or anything else, the cleaner and fresher you can keep that fluid, the better it's going to perform for you. So at most, we recommend once a year for optimum performance. And then if you race hard or ride a lot, maybe you would want to do it every fall and every spring.
Okay, so yeah, sort of like, with the more extreme environments, just like air filters and oil, you should pay attention to your coolant as well.
Correct.
A lot of people probably overlook that. Okay, so what are some problems you hear from your customers regarding their cooling systems? Is there something that repeatedly comes up?
Well, it depends on if we're talking about dirt bikes or street bikes. But let's say, for example, with dirt bikes, one of the common things we get with the dirt bike market is that riders, when it's not like in the old days when we had two-stroke motorcycles, we could stop, sit, and BS with our friends for 10 minutes on a trail. Yeah. You can't do that anymore with a four-stroke. And that's the kind of complaints people call up, and they'll say, if I stop for 5 minutes, it all of a sudden just starts spitting out everywhere. And you just have to remember, your engine is dependent upon moving air. And this is what people forget, and it also applies to street bikes.
Sitting in traffic, I guess.
Exactly. It's the exact same issue with street bikes. And that's what I was going to move on to. At least with the street bikes, you have a fan. But the problem with the fan is typically they come on too late, or they're just not efficient enough. They're just enough there to pull a little bit of air across, so we're not completely overheating, but it's just right on the edge. And you can buy different fan blades and so on to help that. But we have to remember, with dirt bikes, you have to keep moving. There's no way around it. With street bikes, one of the things we've recommended for years is adding a manual switch to your fan. That way you can turn your fan on prior to reaching that red light or that traffic jam and try and maintain those lower temperatures a little earlier rather than waiting for it to get to the overheating point and then the fan automatically kicking on.
Sure, that's a great idea. Okay, and then the last one I have for you here is I'm sure this comes up a lot when people are changing their coolant, and why would air in your cooling system be a problem?
You cut out on me. So what was the question again? I'm sorry.
The air, like when you're done changing your coolant, you need to bleed out your cooling system,
Correct.
and I'm sure a lot of people get that. I mean, what would your explanation for people that just aren't aware? Why would that be a problem having air in my cooling system?
Well, just imagine a balloon jammed into a tube.
Yeah,
It's the exact same idea.
it's not gonna flow properly.
It's not going to flow properly. If we took, let's just say we take, let's use a habit trail. We all remember those as kids with our little hamsters and so on.
Yeah.
Just imagine if you jammed a balloon inside of the habit trail. If you put a balloon inside of the habit trail, it becomes ineffective. Nothing can flow past it. We're talking about the exact same thing. So when you have an air bubble or an air pocket lodged either within a hose or typically within a corner of the system, because it bends and goes around all kinds of different corners. If you have an air bubble there, what you're doing is you're impeding the flow. So what you have to do is get those air bubbles and air pockets out of there in order to not impede the flow. That's where, in not impeding the flow, is the ultimate goal of every product, whether it's ours or water wetter or any other surfactant product. You want to allow that fluid to flow through the system as smoothly as possible. And the more smoothly you can allow that fluid to flow through the system, the more effective it's going to be at drying off heat because it's flowing more smoothly across the metal surfaces.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good answer. So yeah, so when we got air in there, our switch, our cooling fan switch, and our sensors aren't even going to tell our fan to cool on. We're just going to totally overheat.
Correct. It's just a blockage. You might as well stick a rock in there.
Yeah. Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. Well, great. Well, that's all the questions that I have for you, and we highly recommend using your product, and we appreciate the time you spent with us.
It was my pleasure.
All right, sir.
We're here today talking about cooling system issues because we found some interesting problems in our CBR 250. We were tearing this bike down to do a manual, and Greg came across some problems with the water pump.
Yeah, we got into the bike, we pulled the water pump cover off, and then we removed our mechanical seal, and we noticed a lot of odd corrosion back there. Now, this could be caused from like a failed mechanical seal installation at the factory. They didn't clean it up properly, put a new seal in. Maybe the seal leaked for a little while in the beginning, and then the coolant was trapped back there, and it was rusting around the impeller shaft, corroding against the aluminum cover. We don't really know exactly what happened, but there was definitely a problem back there. And if this bike got older, who knows how hard it would be to clean this up. You may have had to replace the whole entire clutch cover. But take a look at this video, and you can see the whole story for yourself. Most periodic maintenance charts call for around a 2-year service interval on cooling systems. At times you can think, well, my cooling system's working fine. I have no problems. Therefore, I'm just going to skip that 2-year interval. We don't recommend this. It's very important to pay close attention to your cooling system and your periodic maintenance chart. So on this particular motorcycle, what we noticed right off the bat was some seepage out of our telltale hole here, which is just a small hole at the bottom of your case cover, and when the seal starts to fail, you'll notice some seepage here, and that's when it's time to go in and investigate. Now keep in mind, a teensy-weensy amount is normal, but anything past that is abnormal. Farther in, we remove this mechanical seal, and we noticed a lot of corrosion. Along with this corrosion in the water pump housing, we'll notice the oil seal is in a state of deterioration. It's not going to be long before this fails, and then your oil seal is no longer doing its job. The last piece of damage here that we need to address is the impeller shaft. The corrosion caused severe pitting and wear on the impeller shaft along the area it rides in this oil seal. So if we were to replace all these parts and put the same impeller shaft in with those pits, it'd prematurely wear your new seal and you'd have to go back in and redo the work you've already done. This is why you should not ignore your periodic maintenance chart, and you should change your coolant at the indicated time. So, long story short, don't ignore your cooling system. Don't ignore your periodic maintenance chart. Will, what are some real-world situations our customers have had with their cooling systems?
Greg, I went back through some of our service tickets and looked at some of the questions and comments and feedback that some of our members have had on their cooling systems. And one of our customers with a KDX 200 had an issue after he replaced his head gasket. He was experiencing a pressurizing effect in his cooling system where it was pumping the coolant back out through the radiator cap when the engine ran.
Well, the first thing I would ask him is, when his engine was torn down, did he take a straight edge and a feeler gauge, and did he check for warpage of his head? Obviously, he had some kind of overheating issue, and he went in there to fix it. So maybe it got so hot, it warped either his head or his cylinder, and now his new head gasket's not sealing properly. The exhaust gases are pressurizing his cooling system, and he's thinking he's just going to bleed it out and go riding, but it's not going to happen. It's just going to keep blowing coolant out everywhere. This is why you need to do all of the checks necessary when you're there and save yourself some time and money.
In addition to technical questions, we also love to hear feedback from our users. I've got a couple here I'd like to share with you. This one's from David. I bought your CRF 450 manual, and I have used it a few times now. I'm amazed at the high quality photographs. The text is very easy to follow. Excellent. Thanks, David. Another one from John. I rebuilt my CRF 450 about 5 times over 3 years with the Cyclepedia Manual, and I really love it. It's nice to be able to take the manual out on my laptop in the garage and have it right there next to my bike. Thanks for making a complex procedure really easy. We really like to hear from you guys. If you have a technical question or feedback about the manuals, feel free to contact us. The CRF 450 manual has just been updated with larger photos, and it should load faster for you guys out there. It's available online. You can check it out, and you can view a lot of the content of the manual without even paying for a subscription. Subscriptions do come with technical support if you have any questions about working on your bike. So getting back to another technical question, another one that we had was, how should you troubleshoot a radiator fan? If you think it's not coming on, what should you check, Greg?
Well, if you're really concerned about maybe an electrical problem, the first thing you can do is directly jump 12 volts to the radiator fan. That way you can just skip everything else, make sure the fan spins. From there, when you know your fan is working properly, you warm the bike up, whatever kind of indication it has for coolant temperature, whether it be an analog gauge or actual digital temperature gauge. You want to keep an eye on that. Make sure your coolant levels are proper. Start the bike up, warm it up. Sometimes it can take as long as 20 minutes depending on ambient air temperatures. Just feel the radiator, make sure it's getting warm, watch your temperature gauge, make sure it's not going to overheat, and then just wait. And when the cooling fan comes on, it cycles, it blows the hot air through the radiator cooling fins, cuts off. You have now cycled your cooling system. You know it's working properly. Go ahead and let it all cool down, and then remove the radiator cap, follow the instructions, and check your coolant levels, and you should be good to go.
John GPZ 550 would like to know, what are the 2 hoses that run to the coolant reservoir tank?
On that particular motorcycle, you would have one hose that would be your siphon hose. It's going to go from your reservoir tank, and it's going to connect to the filler neck of your radiator. Now, as the radiator warms and cools, it's going to allow it to blow excess coolant out when it's hot and suck it back down as it cools. The other one is going to be a coolant overflow hose.
Is this typical of most coolant systems?
Yes, it would be. So I would like to ask Will at this point, what's new? What do we got new coming out at Cyclepedia?
Well, Greg, we have a couple new manuals getting ready to come out. We have the KYMCO Agility 125, which is a popular scooter. We also have the Raptor 700 Sport ATV manual, and that's been a very popular quad for many years now. And we're also going to have a new podcast coming pretty soon, going over the American International Motorcycle Expo. that we attended recently in Orlando, Florida. We've answered hundreds of technical questions over the years from our members, guys at home, and professionals in shops, and we like to bring some of those up on the podcast. If you guys have any technical questions that you would like us to examine on the podcast, get Greg's professional opinion, feel free to send them in to Cyclepedia, fill out a service ticket, include podcast in the subject, and we'll try to go over it next time.
Yeah, don't be shy. It's always entertaining and sometimes challenging to go over these questions and try to help you guys out. Alright, so we got a special deal out there for the Cyclepedia podcast viewers. If you guys are ever in need of parts, working on your bikes, OEM parts for Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki, even Polaris, we got a coupon code for you to enter to get yourself 10% off. Will, where are they going to go to do this at?
If you go to www.mrcycles.com and enter the coupon code Cyclepedia, that's the name of our company, Cyclepedia, in all lowercase in the coupon code field, you'll get 10% off, and they're very knowledgeable, and I'm sure they can answer any questions you have about ordering OEM parts.
It's where we get all our parts, right?
Mm-hmm.